Hello there and welcome. In this episode we're looking at macroalgae, one of my favourite subjects at the moment. More specifically, we're looking at what kind of lighting do you need to keep macroalgae. Macroalgae is very much like plants, however they are also very different and can have different needs depending on which species of macroalgae you want to grow. Now in this tank you'll notice there are a few different types of macroalgae, and I've been experimenting with these for my personal knowledge and also just to grow them and see what we can do. And I've discovered a few different things and I thought I'd just share it with you if you're interested in growing macroalgae. So firstly, the most important thing you've got to realise is these need to be treated like a plant and not like a coral. So lighting is actually one of the more key elements to growing macroalgae than anything else. Now there are different types of macroalgae from different regions of the world and from different depths of the ocean, and they all need subtly different things. So there we've got some Caulerpa prolifera. Now that's a green algae, lives fairly shallow, likes to live in a sand bed, although you wouldn't know it because it's growing on a rock. And you notice it's green. This algae here is Botrocladia. Now this one is a red algae. This other algae here is blue octodes, and you'll notice it's blue. Now the reason I'm pointing out the fact that they're all different colours is that is what you need to look out for. Each different colour has evolved for a certain reason, and that's because of the depth or the environment that they live in. And they're all these different colours because they need different kinds of lighting. So we'll start with green algae. Now green algae is your most basic kind of macroalgae, and it's green much like terrestrial plants because it uses pretty much the entire spectrum of light to grow. Now the light spectrum to grow is actually sunlight. It's not the high intensity lighting that you'd normally put over a marine tank. It's not 14,000K lighting. It is sunlight, 6,500K. Each of these different colours of algae use slightly different wavelengths to grow because they are at different depths of the ocean and they're in slightly different environments. So when you're working out what lighting you need to use, you need to kind of work out where your algae is from and what it needs. So we'll start with this red algae, Botrocladia. It's red because it doesn't really use red light, although it will do a little bit. Much like green plants don't use the green spectrum, this one doesn't really use the red one, and that's because it's quite deep and the only light that penetrates down there is the blue spectrum of light. So its chlorophylls are designed to absorb more in the blue spectrum than in the red spectrum. And another example of this would be this blue octode. So it's blue. I think it still classifies as a red algae, however you can see quite clearly that it's a blue-purple colour. And that's because it's quite a shallow algae, and the reason it's blue is because it will have chlorophyll activation in the red spectrum of light. So it actually uses the red and doesn't use the blue, so that's why it's the blue colour. Now I have noticed that when you put actinics over this, it fluoresces more and more blue. So it's almost like a SPS coral, where the higher intensity light you give it, the more kind of sunscreen it wants to produce and reflect away that light it doesn't use. Green algae are much like common plants, and they'll use pretty much all of the spectrum. So let's have a look at what light I'm actually using to grow these macroalgae. You might be a little bit surprised. So I'm using LEDs. These are really good LEDs by TMC, it's Tropical Marine Centre, and they're actually grow beams. So these lights, with the exception of this blue, these lights are designed to grow freshwater plants. And I use them because they give a full spectrum of lighting. Now in your marine tank you'll probably have some 12,000K, some 15,000K, and possibly some real blue actinics at 19, 20K. Which is great for corals and it looks really nice, but your algae won't be growing at maximum yield under that kind of lighting because it doesn't really want that high spectrum. That's quite blue end of the spectrum, whereas a lot of these algae actually want red, with the exception of Botrocladia. So when you're selecting what light you want to buy to grow your macroalgae, you need to look at what macroalgae you've got, where it's from, what kind of chlorophylls it uses to capture light, and you can generally work that out just by what colour it is. There are different lights available, so you may have seen those bright pink and blue lights that you get for growing terrestrial plants. They would be excellent in your sump if you were going to grow green algae, but not so good if you were going to grow red algae, because the red won't be used, so all that pink light, half of it won't be getting used. But generally, I would say if you want to grow macroalgae in your marine tank, it'd be well in your interest to stick some 6500K lights over it, because that will give most algae the best chance of getting the light spectrum that they need. The only thing to watch with that is corals absolutely love 6500K, because it's where the zooxanthellae photosynthesize the most. Funnily enough, they're also an algae, so it may make your corals go slightly brown just because of how happy they are. So thank you for watching. I hope this video has been vaguely educational, bit of a rambler, but hopefully it will help you with growing your macroalgae. So please remember to like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of this kind of content. Thank you for watching, and happy fish keeping!